Well, today we begin to look at Jacob's final words to his 12 sons in what is really a wonderful chapter that we'll spend a couple weeks, maybe 3 weeks in. And as we see in this chapter, Jacob has a specific word for each of his 12 sons. And today we're going to look at what Jacob says to 3 of his sons, Reuben, Simeon, and Levi. Now, at this point, Jacob is at the end of his life. He knows he's dying. He's literally on his deathbed. And he calls his 12 sons to his bedside so he can share a final word with each son before he passes into glory. And it's a very, very beautiful, touching scene of a dying father sharing a last word and moment with his sons. And I imagine it was comforting to Jacob to have all of his sons present with him in the room one final time and to be able to speak to each son individually one last time and for the family to be together for this experience as their father passes away. And I look at this and I think, may God give each of us such grace when we come to the end of our lives, to have the opportunity to be gathered with our family and our loved ones and our friends, and to be able to speak to each of our children one final word before we go to be with Jesus. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 21 tells us that Jacob was full of faith and worshiped when he was dying. What a way to describe a person who's dying. Again, would it be so for us when our time comes to be full of faith in Jesus Christ, not full of regret, not full of bitterness, not full of worry, but full of faith and worshiping the Lord as we pass into eternity? Now, Jacob's final words to each of his sons in chapter 49 are prophecy. They're prophecy. They are describing the future of each of the 12 tribes of Israel that will descend from Jacob's 12 sons. And this chapter provides us with one of the most amazing examples of prophecy in the Bible. And one of the things that makes this chapter so amazing is that we can read the prophecies here in chapter 49, and then we can read ahead in the Old Testament and see how these prophecies were fulfilled in later history. We can verify their fulfillment. Most of these prophecies that Jacob speaks to his sons are fulfilled, 500-600 years later. In the case of Judah, it's fulfilled in Jesus Christ, ultimately, 1,700 years after Jacob speaks these words. Predictive prophecy, listen, is unique to the Bible. There's no other book, no other religious books or religious writings that have predictive prophecy, predicting future events, as we find here in chapter 49. It's unique to the Bible, and prophecy demonstrates the divine authorship of the Bible, because only God knows the end from the beginning. And so it shows us, it proves to us that the Bible is not an ordinary book written by men, it's written by God. And it's trustworthy. It's trustworthy. You can trust the Bible. Now, what Jacob says to each of his sons also provides us with some practical application for our lives. What he says shows us what virtues to imitate and what characteristics to avoid in life, so that we will have a blessed life. Look at verse 1. Again, Jacob is on his deathbed. He knows he's dying. He's at the end of his life. And Jacob called his sons and said, "Gather together, that I may tell you what shall befall you in the last days. Gather together and hear, you sons of Jacob, and listen to Israel, your father." Jacob gathers his sons around his bed. And he says, "Gather together that I may tell you what shall befall you in the last days." Now, in your Bible, the phrase "in the last days" most often refers to the last days of this present age that we're living in, or what we sometimes call the end times, like in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 1, where Paul says, "But know this, that in the last days perilous times will come." And we would all say, yes, they have. Perilous times have come. Or in 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 3, "Know this, that scoffers will come in the last days." That's talking about the last days of this present age before the kingdom age, when Christ returns and establishes his kingdom here on the earth. That's how this phrase, "in the last days," is most often used in your Bible. But in some instances, this phrase, "in the last days," refers simply to subsequent years. What will happen in subsequent years? The New Living Translation of this verse says, "What will happen to each of you in the days to come?" So Jacob is speaking prophetically, he's speaking prophecy, and he's telling each of his sons what will happen to them and their descendants in the days to come. And Jacob begins with his son Reuben, his firstborn. And again, we can read these prophecies here in chapter 49, and then we can look through the rest of the Old Testament, and we can see how God fulfilled these specific prophecies for each tribe.